every time you would get pregnant, then we were all kind of nervous because we didn't know like
We're
how
waiting
many days.
I was waiting for that ball to drop.
Yeah. Is it going to be days? Is it going to be a couple of weeks?
Right.
Like
exactly.
what's going to happen?
Because how is it going to happen? Am I going to start bleeding?
Yeah,
or is it just my numbers are going to stop increasing?
And
is my body going to naturally release it, or am I going to need to have a DNC?
Right.
Mm-hmm. But you go back to this, when I found out I was pregnant with Aiden, I actually didn't realize I was pregnant with Aiden. And I came to see you because my numbers weren't coming down. And I was like, we need to speed this up.
Which numbers are you talking about?
My hormone numbers after my 6th miscarriage and trying to get pregnant, or Dr. Beck telling us we need to take a break.
Yeah.
And I remember being in your office and you were checking my pulse and you said, "Are you pregnant?" And I said, "No, I'm on a break. What are you talking about? I'm not pregnant. There's no way."
Right.
And so we did our session. And before I walked out the door, you said, "You need to go home and take a pregnancy test." And I remember thinking, this is bonkers. It's going to come back positive because my hormone levels are still risen. Like, why would I take a pregnancy test? And
the lining was at 5 millimeters.
It was, yeah. I mean,
like
there was no,
it was early in the luteal phase.
Exactly.
It couldn't even been, it wouldn't show up, but it, okay. And so
I went home and I took a pregnancy test. It came back positive. But again, I assumed it's positive because I still have HCG in my system from this miscarriage of 6 weeks ago that my body's trying to still figure itself out. Went to get a blood work done. I remember Dr. Beck's nurse calling me and saying, "So your hormone levels have risen." I'm like, "How did that happen?" Like, I don't understand. This is like completely against science or anything that I've been like working on. Of how this is supposed to go down.
Right. But I remember the lining being so thin, so the urgency was put on some estrogen patch stat.
Yes.
Right? Like
I went on basically everything.
Yeah. And then we were
hormone
all
therapy central.
Yeah. And because we'd never seen that happen, I mean, seen this situation happen, we just all were like, hurry, rally, support, hold.
Right.
So probably stayed on herbs. I think we did the added flavors. I'm not sure.
That sounds right.
I mean, that one, 8 treasures, who knows? But I'm sure we came back in with the tonics. But like anything we could do to support that.
Right.
We did. Right. And I don't know if you did any bed rest or anything.
No. I was still teaching. Well, at that point, it was during the summer. So my teaching was less. So I guess in a way, my body was less stressed.
Yeah.
Right. By default, of circumstance default.
But yet another change from like overworking, overdoing, overmoving.
Right.
And so the lining responded to the estrogen patch. She would have given you some progesterone suppositories, right? And you kept coming in for acupuncture. And lo and behold,
then 12 or 13 weeks later, she was graduating me to my OB. And I was like, no, I'm not ready. I don't want to do another change. Like, this feels so comfortable and I'm settled. And
And the part in you that likes to succeed saw numbers doubling, heartbeat scan and continuing and all of that. And then would have been like normal genetics and stuff. So, okay, so that's little Aiden Chase. Yes. And then...
And his middle name we chose Chase because we were chasing this dream of starting a family.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Then you started chasing the little boy. Right? So how old was Aiden when you decided to come back for his sibling?
Good question. I believe he was around 2-ish. I decided I wanted to come back and start because, again, I felt like, I defied science. Like all of my struggles are going to be...
I can do it again. Now my womb knows what to do.
My womb knows what to do. I, leaned into the seed program again, eventually.
And you presumably had a vaginal birth.
So I ended up having a C-section, unplanned C-section.
Okay. So there was something happened there at the end?
Yes. But it had nothing to do with my uterus as much as had to do with him being just a almost 9-pound baby and not able to... He was sunny side up and we were able to rotate him in labor, but then he went at a diagonal and ended up just trying to come out of my hip bone, which obviously was not going to work.
Gosh.
So,
yeah. Okay. Yeah. So positional. And so then you had a C-section. Okay.
Correct.
So that wasn't traumatic necessarily. It was like a decision you had to make.
Right. I think that I did, again, go back to like this grief process. I did have to grieve. That's not how I wanted or what I expected, right? I had a doula. I thought I was going to do this natural birth, and it went everything but that.
Right. Yeah. Again, how we process what we get, right?
Exactly.
So then fast forwarding 2 years later, and because I saw you frequently during the pregnancy, and it really agreed with you, and you didn't have to do like blood thinners or steroids or anything. So it was like, okay, let's do it again. Let's just like start with Chinese Prozac instead of doing it later. And it didn't work.
And I kept having losses. And so, on this side of the holistic end, I was doing these Chinese herbs. I was really leaning into the seed program, into fertile thoughts, doing all of that. And by this point, I was very in, right? I was not resistant in the same way as I was in the previous journey. And then on the sort of, Western medicine, I was trying, I didn't do Clomid again, but I did metformin. A cycle of metformin. We would do a cycle of IUI. We do natural.
Why did they give you metformin? Did they think you had PCO or?
Well, my first reproductive endocrinologist with my first 3 pregnancies thought I had PCOS. Dr. Beck did not agree with that diagnosis.
Right. We were talking about that in her episode how women can be given metformin, but in truth, it's that they would benefit from something like Menopur because it's a hypothalamus problem.
Interesting.
And Menopur being an LH and FSH, then to put that in is like a pituitary hypothalamus reset.
I see.
Makes a lot of sense, right? Now, like hindsight is always 20/20.
Totally.
But in the moment, it was like, okay, throw the metformin at it, throw anything you can.
Exactly. And we tried different angles of IUI versus natural but timed. So I would still go in to get a trigger shot and figure all that out. IVF was never really on the table because of how many losses I had. And the few that we did test chromosomally when we were doing DNCs always came back as chromosomally perfect.
So they were normal. Those losses were normal.
At least the ones that we tested.
Yeah, because of your age, the genetics, and his age too. So it stands to reason. And karyotyping obviously was done, right, as part of the standard workup, right? So we could rule that out too. So then these 3 pregnancies post-Aiden looked like chemicals, natural. How did that happen?
Good question. I always lost all of my miscarriage. Has somewhere between 6 weeks and 9 weeks. So some of those pregnancies I saw cardiac activity, and some I never got to that point.
Yeah, fetal heartbeat.
It just really depended.
Right. It was hit or miss.
It was.
So random.
So now we're at miscarriage number 9.
Yeah.
And I was physically and emotionally pretty spent.
Yeah.
But I knew that I wanted to grow my family. And I continued to come see you for hormone balance and those Chinese herbs. I was like, I knew I needed it. I could feel like intuitionally, I could feel that my body responded positively to them. But we did choose to sort of re-angle in what are our other options of growing a family.
Yeah. What's the best choice right now?
Correct. Exactly. And adoption is something that my husband and I had talked about even before we got married as something that was placed on our hearts. Aww. And so we knew that it wasn't we're desperate, we're going to look for this thing. It was more of, is now the time that we're leaning into this thing that we knew we were always going to do. We just never knew when the right time was. And we had made that decision before even knowing what our fertility journey was going to look like.
Which is really interesting. And I've heard other people say that they have always been open to or thought they would do an adoption process. Yeah.
Yeah. So after my 9th miscarriage, we really leaned into that and really educated ourselves on what it means to be a parent of an adoptee and what are our different options in that route. And I felt like I really wanted to learn from my experience of trying to get pregnant for so many years and having so many losses, of not just going into it naive like I had at the beginning, of my fertility journey. I wanted to really educate myself and feel like the education that I was receiving that way mixed with my intuition was guiding our steps, because there's so many